Well, welcome to the Community Lab podcast. I'm Michelle, and I'm here with my sister Devin. This is our very first episode of our podcast, and we have some very special guests with us today. We have actually, over the last several months, recorded several episodes with some great guests, but there's some recent events that have been happening uh, in our world right now, and we felt that it was really important to take a pause and have a really important discussion and bring light to some of the things that are happening in our lives right now. And today we have some super talented dancers with us that we have had the pleasure of working with and dancing with, and I feel very honored to be able to introduce them to you today. Please welcome Divine and Darian.
Hello.
Welcome, guys. Thank you so much for coming on to talk to us.
Thank you for having us.
So lots of things happening. We're living in a world now where a lot of us are staying at home and working from home, and kind of in the midst of this COVID-19 pandemic, as if we didn't have enough to deal with. We've had some recent events with the death of George Floyd, and of course Breonna Taylor. Her case has come to light again, and it's really created sort of this uprising of the community to come together and sort of stand in solidarity and say enough is enough. And I know that I feel really passionately about this. I know Devin does too. A lot of our friends, particularly in the dance community, we stand by. And I know for me, with my 7-year-old son, it's really disappointing to know that I'm raising him in a world like this. And it's really disappointing. It was difficult. We actually sat down and had a conversation. We went to our local protest here in Eastlake, and he had a lot of questions, and he was able to actually talk to a lot of people and get those questions answered. But it's a tough conversation to have. It's not an easy one, but now is the time to actually have those conversations. And that's why we wanted to bring the two of you on today. So thank you for joining us. So let's go ahead and jump right in. I'm interested to know from each of you, how has this affected you or any loved ones that are close to you? Divine, go ahead and go first, and then Darian, jump in.
Cool. So I think now that I've had time to digest everything that's been going on, I have a better understanding of where I'm at, because I think during the midst of BLM getting a lot of this rapid involvement that it's never had before from especially people outside the Black community, it was just overwhelming, to say the least. Just the whole week, it's how do you feel? It's I don't know how I feel. Everything's too much. But personally, it's something that I've been involved with for a while now, since I started to learn more about it in high school, and the meaning behind it, and how powerful it can be, and how much it can help us in the future. But when I went to protests, and I have been talking to different people, I was really sad and angry, which is common for most people to feel that way. But I was really sad and angry. It makes me think about my dad, and this isn't the first case of police brutality. It's honestly, in my opinion, one of the least brutal that I've seen online, that I've seen a recording of. And when I was at the protest, and you're in between these barricades of police, and you see all these people coming together, which is beautiful. It kind of just makes you think that could have been my dad, or that could have been my friend, or that could have been my teammate. And I think that's one of the most heartbreaking parts of everything that's been going on. So that's kind of where I've been at. But I think it's definitely been super awesome to see a bunch of different people come together, which kind of gives you that balance of happiness to cope with the sadness and angriness, I would say. Yeah, that's it.
I would say for me, it's definitely been a roller coaster of, I think, just years getting to this point of being aware of it, and I guess being told in my childhood of ways to act in public and how to carry myself so that I wouldn't get into situations with police. And for most people, that's probably not normal to be engraved in your childhood, but that's something that I've just been constantly told, especially when all these cases would happen. It's always my parents reminding me not to give them a reason to arrest me or kill me. Um, and then it got to a point of just being just desensitized to everything. And now that there was so many back to back in the last month that came to light, it was just more of like a breaking point. And like Divine said, it was a good uplifting feeling to see everybody coming together in solidarity for this movement. But at the same time, it's also hurtful to know that it took this long and for us to all be trapped inside to pay attention and see that it's come to light. So it's been an emotional roller coaster to deal with this. I do, of course, remain positive during all this because I think the movement itself has finally caught a little bit of momentum, and I just hope for the best from here.
Yeah, definitely. I feel the momentum, and I'm hopeful like you, and I hope that we don't stop here. I hope that the momentum continues for the long haul, right? Because so many times historically we've seen everyone sort of, come together and in brief snapshots in history, where we all kind of run together and we say, okay, like what are we going to do to fix this? And then something else bad happens in the world and we forget about it. And I hope that people like in our dance community, I've seen a lot of our peers post every day, and I hope that that continues because we really need to bring light to this issue. And I hope that we can all continue to just push forward and not forget until we see some change, because it has to be, this has to be the time for change. So with that, Darian, I know you touched on it, and I'll go back to you. I know that you were raised to live a certain way. You said that your parents told you to be really mindful. What about any like current experiences with racism? Have you experienced anything recently? And how do you deal with that? And then I'd love to also hear from Divine on that as well.
The sad thing is that if it occurred recently, it hasn't been enough to be ingrained in my head because it's happened quite a bit in my life, I guess you could say. Like I could think of times of just, I remember I was out at the bar. It was after the bar had closed and we were in Fullerton. And I was just standing on the street as we were waiting to go our separate ways, and somebody just drove by and just shouted the N-word out of nowhere. And it's one of those things where everyone that I was with was, they were Asian, so I was, I think, the only Black person, maybe one other person at the time, but it was just a moment of shock and not really knowing what to do. And of course, because it was a drive-by, there's not much you can do to fight that or have a chance for people to step in and, I guess, defend you. But I realized in those times, conversations were never had because those are very sensitive subjects that nobody wanted to really talk about, nor did I bring it up. And so I can't really think of anything recent, but I think that's also the sad part, that when it happens, it's always just been like a day to me that I just have to brush off and keep going.
Yeah, Divine, what about you?
Personally, like when I think about it in retrospect, I honestly wouldn't say I experienced so much racism, more so like I more experience like sexism versus racism, but of course there's like intersectionalism, which like also involves like me being a woman and then me being a brown woman, you know what I mean? And like I don't think I've had any like personal attacks that I could think of either. um yeah, I'm not in school right now either, so it's like I'm not really with people. But when I think about like my family or like witnessing my family go through things, something that like has happened commonly is like my like dad always getting stopped at the airport, like even though he has nothing in his bag that like goes to the detectors, but he always gets stopped. Like I think there's only one time that we've gone like on a trip and he hasn't been stopped, like literally one time, and we've traveled a lot. Or like at the Navy base, we had a couple banquets there, a couple bonding days there for my junior team, and like you have to have your name on a list in order to get into the through the gates and the Navy base. And like my dad will drop me off and like he'll be like, oh, what's your daughter's name on the list? He'll tell them my name, and then they won't let him in, and they'll have to have send like my director to come out and get me because they won't let my dad in. But when my mom takes me, it's like, oh yeah, you could go drop her off because my mom is Filipino, small Filipino woman. And yeah, like I guess like you could say like my dad really does fit like the stereotype when it comes to like a really big 6'2", 230 pound, like dangerous, threatening Black man, you know? And so it's like, I've never had any personal attacks that I could think of like recently, but it's like when I think of my family experiencing it, that's like the closest experience I have to that. And I feel like when people do things like that or like are just like inconsiderate of other human beings, it really makes you think like you're a human being, like shouldn't you empathize for another human being? Like we're all the same, like without the color of our skin, like shouldn't we empathize for each other? So that's like the most recent thing I could think of.
That the things that you just shared, Divine and also Darian, it makes me sick to my stomach to know that these things are happening still. I think I've been blinded by just knowing that, you know, we've known you guys for so long. You guys are good people. I know we jumped right into this discussion, but for our listeners, Divine and Darian are up there with the best of them. And it just appalls me to think that people would not treat you with the same kind of love and respect that I'm sure they would want for themselves. And I think that's why, again, we see this coming together of not only our community, but just around the world. It's crazy to see the amount of support that this movement is getting to really see some change and to make it lasting and impactful. So let's talk a little bit about some organizations, petitions, protests, or other actions that you guys have participated in as part of this movement. Let's start with Divine.
Cool. I need to actually pull up this document that I've been referencing. I've been definitely attending protests. It's scary because they start off peaceful, but then sometimes people have different agendas. So I think when it comes to protesting and being at the front lines, that's completely to your discretion and how you feel safe, especially with the pandemic going on and like your area. Because, you know, I'm in San Diego, so it's not too dangerous compared to other places like in the East Coast or in the South. So protests completely up to people's discussions, but places that I've been, petitions I've been signing are definitely cases like to reopen like Breonna Taylor's case, justice for George Floyd, justice for Ahmaud Arbery. And then there's also like one woman named Tamala. She's like went on like a trip with these other white moms and she ended up thrown off a balcony, beaten up and thrown off a balcony, and her case was never you know, solved. They said, I forget what they said it was. And there's another boy, I forget his name, but his organs. He was gutted and like beat up and rolled up in a wrestling mat, and like they ruled him as like no injuries and like never arrested anybody. So just like petitions to like get justice for those whose names need to be heard, because it's like it is common, like it is like there's so many. It's sad because like there's so many people you can find to sign petitions for, like so many Black lives that need justice. So I think yeah, I've just been looking at those, and then some organizations that I think are good to donate to is definitely, of course, like the BLM, BlackLivesMatter.com. There's ACLU. That's I think it's a national one. I'm not sure. And then another one is NPAP, which is for the police. The full title of it is, one second. Oh, National Police Accountability Project. I think it's important that we get the system educated. Like the people inside the system need to be educated in order to make real change. I think the biggest way to make change is politically and through authorities. So yeah, those are just some of the few that I've been looking into that I'm like more familiar with, but there's many, many more that I don't know.
Honestly, everything that Divine just said, I've completely sided with as well for signing petitions and donating to. One thing that I've tried to be a very loud advocate about is for gay and trans lives, because I feel like in the Black community, it's already bad enough that it feels like the Black community as a whole is fighting for their rights, but even within the Black community, there's a divide between people that are cis, straight men, even females, looking down upon being gay or trans. And for example, Tony McDade was a trans man that was beaten to death. There's two that recently were killed just within the past 24 hours in Philadelphia, I think it was. So it's just advocating for not just Black lives, but all Black lives, no matter the lifestyle, sexual orientation, anything like that. In terms of organizations that I've been wanting to support and like really advocating for is there's an organization called Black Vision Collective, which is committed to a long-term vision for Black lives not to only matter, but to also thrive. So I think that's important. Once we get to a point of realizing that the lives matter, how can we now bring these lives up? And of course, Campaign Zero, that's really important to understand your rights, to end police brutality and knowing your rights when faced against police, because I think it's very important for people not just to turn a blind eye to their rights, what you're supposed to be or what you're supposed to be asked, and what you shouldn't be asked when you're being stopped by police. And then, of course, the Innocence Project to exonerate those who were wrongfully incriminated and put into the criminal justice system.
Can I add like one thing? Oh, sorry. I think also like just searching like local Black-owned businesses, supporting Black businesses, like even like small things like little pop-up like food carts, or you know, like just things like that. Like it really helps because it just shows like you support them and like you want them to win too, you know, like you want that community to win just as much as they deserve justice. So
yeah,
those are some really great resources. We will be sure to leave as comprehensive as a list as possible for all of our listeners. And if our listeners have anything to add, you know, please feel free to chime in the comment section below, because the more resources, the more organizations, the more petitions, the more quickly we can move towards this change.
Yeah, and it's so interesting, Darian, because you shed light on you know something very specific. You know, being an advocate for gay and trans. You know, when we think about this situation that we're in, you know, it shouldn't just be heterosexual Black Lives Matter, right? It should be all Black Lives Matter, exactly like you said. It should be, accepting and embracing all kinds, regardless, right? Because we're all human. And I think that that's really important. I think we tend to overlook that when we're looking at this. And so I'm glad you're here so that you can speak to that. The other thing I want to say is, Divine, to your point, we tend not to, I think in everyday conversations, when we're talking with close friends, sometimes we talk politics and stuff. But, at work, it's like etiquette. You don't talk politics, and, you don't want to get in these, heated discussions with people. But, I think part of this movement is to have these political discussions, because one thing is clear: these policies need to change. That is clear as day. And that's probably the most important thing as we move forward in this movement. And for our listeners, not only should you support all the things that Darian and Divine were talking about, but you should also, when you're talking with friends and you're talking with family, have the right narrative too. Make them uncomfortable. Have these conversations about politics, because that's where the change starts, is having these super uncomfortable conversations and having these heated discussions, because we need to push to change the minds of people that are living in the past. So you guys brought up some really great points. Thank you for that. And I think also part of us having you on is, is us learning, for my sister and I too, learning how to have the right narrative, because that's really important, as part of preparation for this episode, and also just following current events. I think we all need to be better about educating ourselves in terms of, what we support, what conversations we're having, making sure that we're having conversations with the right people, because there's a lot of different opinions out there. And I think it's really important to make sure that you're navigating through those conversations correctly. So thank you for helping us better understand those resources and the conversations that we should have.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you guys. So I speak for myself, and maybe I speak for Michelle too, and when I say that being a Filipina American, I've lived my life relatively privileged and unscrutinized. And I know that I have the power to make change, to stand alongside you guys, to help move forward, just abolishing this ridiculousness of racism. It needs to end. And speaking to you guys, I'm sitting here and I'm fired up and I'm so emotional, but I know that that's not enough. We need to be educated, we need to be unlearning, and we need to be learning. So what are some resources, such as documentaries, books, classes, social media accounts, that you guys would recommend your allies to look into? Maybe we'll start with Darian on that one.
I mean, there's so many. I mean, I think speaking currently, I did put together like a little Google Doc that I put a link in the bio of my Instagram, where I wanted to share, because I know a big issue with seeking news is you kind of just believe the first thing that you see, but you don't think about if it's a credible news source. So I wanted to put together something of how people can fact check on their own and things that they could look for, as well as a few sources for Black community-based news coming from the Black narrative, which I think is important. To hear these issues, you should hear it from that perspective as well. In terms of books, I know one that a lot of people are talking about. I haven't read it yet, but it's on my list for White Fragility. It's basically talking about why it's so hard for white people to talk about racism. And then The Color of Law, which is about the forgotten history of the government segregating America. And of course, 13, that's a big one. It's a documentary that's available on Netflix, basically talking about criminalization of African Americans in the U.S. prison system. And I think that's played a big part in the inequality that's faced between the two races. So those have been good sources that has been good to start the discussion. But I think also the willingness to start this discussion is important as well. So you've read it, and now what? Who do you share it with? Who do you discuss it with? And I think the easiest question to ask these days is just why. When you're met with opposition and people are like, it should be this way, or they shouldn't be allowed these rights, the only thing you need to ask is why. Why do they feel that way? I don't think there ever needs to be anything too heated to the discussion where you can't get your point across. I think it's very simple to say a lot of people have their different opinions on politics, but we should all have the same opinion on basic human decency, and no one should be killed just based off the color of their skin. I mean, race is a man-made construct, so for you to feel superior is completely a man-made idea. And so I think just those general points are a good starting point, but never the final point that you should be relying on for information.
Cool. That was beautiful. In terms of like how I became educated, it was kind of like, I guess, it was like unconventional compared to like all the things on social media now, like just in terms of how people are learning now, like because I started learning, like this was brought to me, this topic or idea of BLM was brought to me in high school when I attended I was a part of a peer mediation class, which is basically just like a class like trying to facilitate good human beings into their community to help others, to learn others be, just a good influence. And so that's where it like started. And that's when I started taking my own journey of like, I would watch a lot of like TED Talks, and like I would watch a lot of movies, and like of course like now there's like categories like Black Lives Matter categories on different like Netflix and Amazon, that which I think is really good because it's really convenient. I would read a lot like textbooks. I took 2 history classes specifically on African American history. African American intellectuals is there's a Black intellectual book. I cannot remember the name of the author, but I just like to read how like these Black intellectuals think around this time that all this occurring, like Malcolm X, MLK, like, like just things like that. So I don't really have like, because all this like information that's coming on Instagram is new to me too. Like people making posts and stuff, it's new to me too, because I kind of learned and like grew a passion for what's going on in like a more like school setting, I guess. Like that's where I got all of my information. And then just like simple things like watching movies, like I also watched 13, watching the documentaries When They See Us, like 12 Years of Slave, like if things like that doesn't make your stomach turn, like watching Mercy, it's a Jamie Foxx and Michael B. Jordan film, basically about how a Black man got wrongly accused of a crime and was on death row and had no hope of getting out of death row, and like just watching his journey, like just things like that, like. And I feel like if it doesn't make your stomach turn, it's kind of like you have to like reevaluate like what you value and like your priorities. And I think like when it comes down to it, like education of course is like the start of things, because with awareness, I think that with awareness comes change, like always, because it's like now you're aware, now you can do something about what you know now, but at the end of the day, like Darian said, like the willingness, like the intention, it's like, oh yeah, like you can care because you have a heart, and like you care because that's sad, or like you could care because these people deserve justice, and this community has been oppressed for the longest time in history, you know what I mean? So I think like it really comes down to intention and how much you really want to like do something beyond yourself for other people. Sorry, this is like a little bit of like off like off course, but something that like I struggled with when all of this rapid involvement started happening with BLM was I was kind of like angry at first because I was just like, this isn't new. Like, why does everyone all of a sudden, like, why does everyone all of a sudden care? You know, it's like, I want to be grateful that like BLM is finally getting like the support it needs. But at the same time, I'm like, this isn't new. Like, why, like, and it just gives me the doubt of like, this might be temporary because what we are in a pandemic, everyone's able to be on their phones and be on the media all the time now. You know, their lives aren't so hectic, so they could focus on something beyond themselves. So I'm thinking like, you know, this, some people are probably like supporting this movement as a trend, you know, which is like, I was so irritated at first, like, and I'm like, Divine, like, you should be grateful because like this is a positive change happening. People are making a positive change. They actually want to help. Like, you should be grateful. But it was like that doubt instilled in me, and like whose intentions are true. So I think like when it comes down to it, like the core of the situation, the core of wanting to make change is making sure your intentions are correct and they're pure, and like you're doing it because you want to do it out the goodness of your heart and because you care about it and you care about other people, and like awareness and education and just having a true understanding of what's going on. Because I think something that's important to know is like I said, this isn't new. Like study on like the history of like all of this, like slavery, segregation, like even in like Black soldiers serving in the military being ostracized and discriminated against, serving their nation, and they're still, you know what I mean? Things like that, simple things like that. You have to understand like the core of it. And like, yeah, sometimes like white privilege is blinding, like, and it's like this country is founded off of what? White males. So it's like, it makes sense why people want to like keep that mindset and keep that mentality, because that's what this country was founded off of. And I think, yeah, like some people don't want to lose power because losing power is scary, you know, feeling inferior is scary, you know? So I think just educating yourself and being truly aware of like, this isn't just like not just the modern day racism that's going on, but like what led to it, the systemic racism that led to where we are today. Because yes, we took a big step, like there's no colored bathrooms, white bathrooms, you know, there's none of that. But it's like we are progressing as a society, but it's like we as people are also like progressing like with our own mentality. I don't know how to say it, but it's like it's kind of like we still have that modern day slavery. It's just like advanced, like it's an advanced version. Like technology is advanced. It's like this is an advanced version of like racism and like slavery and segregation and things like that, just in subtle ways now. Subtle because people have a little bit more of a moral compass. So I think just intentions and like education, like for sure, like that, like in terms of like, I guess like not so much tangible change, but like internal change, like that for sure.
Well, and I think to your point, Divine, a lot of the modern day racism that is happening, I think, and this is just my personal opinion, I think we've sort of moved forward as a society and we're going through the motions, but we're missing that historical piece, right? Because we're not seeking out the education to learn the history, but you know, beyond what we know now, right? And I think that this is a really important time to take a moment to, like you said, really educate ourselves and check our intentions, right? Because how can we truly say that we're not racist if we don't have a full understanding of what has happened historically, right? And that is not only for our listeners, I'm saying this to myself too, right? Because we all need to, including myself, check our privilege, check our intentions, and make sure that we're true to that. And I think the only way that we can do that is, you know, visit the resources that, you know, you both have spoke about, and really just educate ourselves and fill in those gaps, right? Because like I said, we've sort of moved through society and we're going through the motions, but there's a big chunk missing, and there's so much that we don't know historically. And I think in order for all of it to come together, we really need to understand that before we can truly move forward with the right intentions. So to our listeners, please make sure that you are intentional and you seek out the proper education. And, we'll make sure to link as many of these resources, in with this episode, because it really is important. I know that I want to make it a point to really take a moment and really educate myself and really educate my son, and really teach him, because he's young, right? And really take this time to really teach him the right way and fill in those gaps early for him. So I love the points that you both made. I mean, really just super impactful. I think that I know for me, I've had a lot of clarity. I went into this conversation, wanting to be vulnerable and wanting to really listen, but I think I've come out of it with a lot of clarity, and I almost feel like my mind has been blown, because I feel like these are a lot of things that we don't think of in our day to day. And even as we're living in this current situation, and we're trying to move forward and go with the momentum of this, I really think that there's a lot of these things that we don't think about, including myself. And so I want to thank you guys for that, because I've really had some major aha moments in this conversation. So thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah. So, we've talked about resources. We've talked about, how racism has affected you. I want to talk about, because, we want to use this as an opportunity to educate our listeners, and also, like Devin and I said, educate ourselves. What are some of the mistakes that you see people making that want to show their support and want to be supportive, but you're like, no, you're not doing it the right way, or you're not saying the right things? What are some things that we can tell our listeners to help them be true to their intentions and really show their support in the right way? Divine, let's go ahead and start with you.
That one is kind of tough for me, just because I feel like, because of the overwhelming amount of like posts and stuff on social media, it's like I feel like some people are like too critical of how others want to support. Like, I think like it's like weird, because it's like, what is the right way to show your support? You know what I mean? You can never know somebody's true intentions unless you ask them, unless you talk to them. So it's like, I think like, even if it's like, maybe if you don't really mean it, but you're still reposting because it's a trend, it's like, well, I mean, the rest of your followers are going to see it, you're still spreading it. I think as long as you like, just like want to help at the slightest bit, and you repost and you like read like I keep up to date with like BLM San Diego, like the Black Lives Matter website, like, websites that facilitate this kind of things. That's how I know what's like true, like what's good to read and stuff. But it's like, as far as like how to support properly, that's hard for me to say. Because I think sometimes we've been too critical on how to do things the right way, when it's like, they just want to help, like even if it's like the slightest repost, they just want to help, So I don't know. I don't really know. I think maybe the right way to support is to accept the support, like in any form, even if it may not be true at first, maybe if it may not be true intent at all, but it's still there, and it's going to reach different people who do have true intent. So.
First off, I definitely agree with Divine. That was going to be a point that I touch on too. I think there are definitely people that are so passionate about unlearning and relearning, and I think that's great. But I think also in that same mentality, you want to be able to educate and share, but also give people an opportunity to learn and grow as well. I think I've noticed some people, like Divine said, they kind of say they're now deciding how people should support, how people should be advocating for anti-racism. But just because I think we're in this age of instant gratification, and we post so much, when you don't see somebody doing something, you're thinking that they're not active at all. Like, for example, you know, everybody was on that quarantine diet and workout, but as soon as they stopped for a week, it's like, oh, did they fall off? And I feel like that's very similar with this movement. Everyone's on this movement, but as soon as somebody stops posting, they think that they've fallen off or they're not doing anything to still educate themselves. But even in that same degree, I don't want to see people going back to the normal of posting, I don't know, what they're eating and them being outside without it being anything participating to the movement. Only because I feel like for things like that, like if you really wanted people to see your breakfast, you could send it to your group chat. And I think that could also be a sign if you send it to the group chat and you get no love back, it kind of shows the importance of like, okay, maybe I don't need to share this breakfast. Maybe I need to just keep it to myself or in the stomach. But I think being able to give people room to grow, and then also people that choose to speak, I think being aware and cognizant of their language that they choose. I've noticed people, I think people still shy away from the topic of Black people and shy away from using the word Black they don't want to be offensive. And I truly don't believe that Black and people of color are meant to be synonymous. People of color are supposed to relate to all races of color, but then when you're interjecting the two and you're saying Black people at the beginning of the paragraph and then now referring to them as people of color, you're now interjecting multiple races into the conversation, and it takes away from the main point that you're trying to make. And then other people trying to skate around saying Black and now saying colored people are now doing a disservice because they're taking us back to segregation when there was whites only and colored fountains and stuff like that. So you never want to refer to somebody as colored. And so I think language has been a big thing that I noticed where I know people mean well, so I'll never immediately just like attack them and lash out at them. But I think being aware of language, and I think that comes with educating yourself and knowing the history that, you know, okay, these are the reasons why we don't say these things anymore. These are the reasons why these things have been completely, well, not completely eliminated, but why they should be eliminated. I think, what else?
While you're thinking, Darian, I just want to say that I really appreciate both of the points that you and Divine brought up, because I've been super guilty of skirting around saying Black people because I don't want to be insensitive. And this is me coming to the party late in supporting, but I'm here and I want to help, and I'm navigating through new waters. But what you said, making space to learn and to grow, is going to be what helps us make lasting change. Because, I mean, you know, the quarantine diet and exercise example that you gave earlier, yes, like some people did fall off. Like it was just sort of a trend, right? Something that they could try out. But there is a lot of stuff that is happening off screen. And we have to remember that, you know, to not be so quick to judge, and again, just make space for people to learn and to grow.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Darian, did you think of what you were going to say?
I did actually. I think now that, even if it may be premature, but now that cities are like reopening in their phase one and you can get small groups together, I think it's important to, I guess, not just talk about it, but be about it with your group of friends, like get together, watch these documentaries, maybe have a discussion about it, bring back book clubs, things like that. I think that'll be important to move the narrative forward, because I think when you're just constantly reposting, if people are getting over it, they can easily just click through your story, mute you, or just not even click on it at all. So I think bringing these people, actually reaching out and bringing people into the conversation is very important.
I love that. That's beautiful. And I'm all about bringing back book club. Let's do it. Let's start with those books that you recommended. Let's do it. Let's do a collab podcast book club. I'm in. So, there's a lot that's happening, in the world right now. And, some of it seems burdensome. A lot of it is uncomfortable. And I just really want to thank you both for being here and talking us through it. We are going to wrap up, but before that we do, we want to end on a little bit of a positive note. So, in light of everything that's happening, I want to know from both of you, maybe one thing that's giving you hope in this situation, and the second thing, like what's good in your area right now. Divine, I know you're in San Diego with Devin and I, but Darian, I know you're living afar right now. So what's one good thing that's happening in the community? So Darian, we'll start with you. One thing that gives you hope, and one good thing that's happening in your local community right now.
One thing that gives me hope is people actually that have been reaching out, showing that they're determined to make a difference and wanting to have the discussions. I think that's been really nice. People that I haven't necessarily seen be vocal, they may have their platforms for posting their art and whatnot, but actually saying something in their stories and stuff has been nice to see. So that gives me a lot of hope of, multiple people speaking out. And I guess just within my city here, it's nice to see that there is a full street that's painted Black Lives Matter, as well as the street changed. I mean, it's a nice performative gesture, so I'm hoping there'll be action behind that down the road. But of course, we shall see. Oh, another positive. I actually educated myself. I didn't realize when you move, you have to re-register to vote for that area. So I re-registered to vote. So I'm excited about that coming up when voting starts.
Cool. I think, honestly, I would definitely say just like the same in terms of like just people reaching out. I've had teammates text me like, can you please just tell me more about this or that? Or like just asking a question. I'm like, heck yeah, like, yeah, I can tell you more. Like, what do you want to know? Like, and I think that's super cool because it's like you said at the Devon, it's like you're late to the party, but you're here. And I think that's important to acknowledge. Like for a lot of people, it's like sometimes you just don't know till you know. And when you know, it's like, what are you going to do about it now? So I think like that's been really nice, like for people to start showing up because, I think as long as you show up when it counts, it doesn't matter like what happened before. Like the past is the past. You learned, you grew from that. So that's been really cool. And then there's just been like also like something good I would say like is now people are starting to like in terms of like my feed and like the dance community, I'm starting to see people incorporate like BLM with like their dances or like make a piece in honor of it. And I think that's awesome. Like I think it's just so cool because it is like refreshing to reintegrate into like the like seeing people's art and seeing people's dance and like normal lives, but also it's like you're seeing their normal lives and how they're including BLM in it too. So I think that's super cool. And also like I live in a pretty privileged like community, super privileged. The kids here got some nice cars, like they are privileged. But and this is like one of the last places I would think to see a protest, but they had a protest in my local neighborhood right there, or park, my local park, like 5 minutes away. And I was like, that is awesome. Like that's just awesome because I really wouldn't have expected like people from this area to have it because most of the protests have been happening downtown, Hillcrest, North Park, Balboa. So that was really, really cool. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you guys. I know that we said we were going to wrap up, but I have one more question, not related to the topic. Are you both still dancing in quarantine?
In my bedroom, yeah. I haven't really necessarily been like, I haven't joined any teams. I don't plan to. I've kind of been taking class before quarantine happened, so it's mainly just been dancing in my room.
Yeah, same. I feel like in the beginning of quarantine, they had all these free classes online, and I was like, oh yeah, like I'm gonna take all these free classes, like get it for free. I'll never get this for free ever again. But then it's like, it comes to a point where you took like 5 classes in one day, and it's like you're by yourself and don't have the energy of other people, and you're like, dang, I think I'll take a break for 2 weeks. Like, so yeah, I've just been like dancing here and there, like a sprinkle, just a little sprinkle. Yeah.
I love it. I love it. Well, we also, if you're okay with it, we would love for our listeners to follow you. So, Divine and Darian, will you share your tags on Instagram? Is that what you call them? Your usernames? What do you call them?
I think so.
I think it's tags. I don't know. I feel old too. I don't know. Handle? I don't know. But on Instagram, I'm Darian. So dairy, milk, yawn, tired. So that's 2 Y's. Yeah, and I think that's all I'm really active on.
Yeah, mine is pretty much just Instagram, Twitter sometimes, but I have the same user for both. It's just Divine Faith with 2 H's at the end, so it's like DIVINEFAITH. Divine Faith.
We'll be sure to link those in the episode description. And Devin, I'll turn it to you in a second, but I just want to, personally thank you both for taking the time to talk with us. I feel a lot of clarity. I know that this isn't the last conversation that I need to have, but it's certainly a great start. I think that you are both not only incredible dancers, but just incredible human beings. And I feel really blessed to know you and to have had this conversation with you. So thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you so much, guys. Thank you for your insight. It really was a learning experience, a learning opportunity for me. And I look forward to continuing to learn from you guys and continue to have the conversations because, like I said, change needs to happen. So whatever I need to do to play my part, to play a helpful and impactful role in helping you guys and helping the Black community, we're here for it. So thank you guys.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.